Hey everyone, it's Alex and welcome to this Pokemon Pocket video. We're going to be discussing the top meta decks of Pokemon Pocket today. Now, these decks are constantly shifting, the meta is constantly moving, and so I'll be releasing updates over time, but I know that a lot of people are interested in what are the top performing lists. These lists were determined using data aggregation, community consensus, and tournament results. So let's get started. But one thing worth mentioning, obviously, is that I know you are likely new to this game and you're thinking, Alex, I can't build any of these decks. Why are you showing me these? Well, it's good to know like where you're going to, where you're going to be in the future, but most importantly, for the people that end up, using the most powerful card in the game, the credit card, there's a good chance they start building these meta decks rather quickly. And so even if you're someone who's relatively free to play or just buying the premium pass and stuff like that, it's good to know what you're up against so that you can plan accordingly. Let's get started. If you've played any of the battle mode, it shouldn't surprise you that the current king of the meta is going to be Mewtwo EX. This deck is just damn good. It absolutely slaps. Gardevoir literally being the engine here for the 4 energy costed Mewtwo side drive, which is powerful enough to pretty much knock out many Pokemon. Some can survive it, but never for a second shot, of course. And at the end of the day, Mewtwo just represents an amazing power potential card in this game. It's a basic Pokemon. Obviously, it has high energy requirements, but that's why Gardevoir is in this deck, right? To create that engine that's required in order to be consistently casting. In fact, this deck, as it stands right now, it solely relies on Mewtwo, which is kind of crazy. And while to some degree it can be scary just running one core Pokemon as your basic attack engine in Mewtwo, it's worth noting here that you are using a Pokeball and you only have 4 cards that are basic Pokemon in 2 sets of that, right? You have the Ralts and you have the Mewtwo. So you're very likely to hit with the Pokeball one of the Mewtwo's if you have not drawn into it already, which basically kind of mitigates some of that risk of not drawing the primary card that you're after. So right now, especially with Sabrina, the opportunity to, like, if you have a threat on the opposing side, you can use Sabrina to essentially mitigate that threat, send it to the bench, and of course allow your Mewtwo to get additional time to build up its power so that it can finally attack. This deck does have highs, it has a little bit of lows if you don't draw into it, but at the end of the day, it's one of the absolute kings of the meta. When we move to the number 2 deck, Venusaur is honestly incredible. This is the tank of the meta. The Venusaur decks have been truly remarkable, especially when you consider the synergy that exists between Venusaur's Giant Bloom, which heals it for 30 damage, and Erica. This deck also runs potions, so you're all in on this healing here. Venusaur is extremely difficult to remove for your opponent with all this additional healing, not to mention it has a 190 HP body off the get-go. Now, the actual attack itself does require 4 energy, it does only hit for 100, so you are seeing like a 50 damage discrepancy from that of, say, something like a Mewtwo. And it also requires a complete evolutionary change. So there are things here that, have to kind of go your way in order to make the most of Venusaur. So how do you get there? Well, it's Exeggutor EX that does it, of course, one of the absolute best cards in the game, only requiring a single energy. Of course, it is an EX Pokemon, but generally speaking, you should have Exeggutor out pretty much right away, and then you have the Venusaur being built up on the bench. Now, of course, it's not always the case that all things go well, and sometimes, you kind of get things knocked out in and out of order, and that's the rules of the game, the heart of the cards, as they say. But generally speaking, this deck is very well-rounded. It's an excellent list. It's one of my absolute favorite in the current game. Moving on to the next deck, we have the Aggro Pikachu deck. Now, this is the aggro list, and it's very aggressive. Again, much like Mewtwo, Pikachu represents a tremendous amount of power potential from a basic Pokemon. Obviously, getting amped up depending on how many electric-based Pokemon are on your bench. Now, in this particular deck, you're not running that many electric Pokemon. You are relying on the Voltorb, the Electrode, and of course, the Zapdos. Some other decks run additional electric Pokemon to fill out the bench more rapidly to give Pikachu an opportunity to do more damage quickly. This deck does utilize Sabrina as disruption, Giovanni to do some additional damage to help close out, some of the more, we'll say higher HP opponents. And then finally, of course, you do have the X speed, which helps to kind of allow you to use your energy more effectively, rather rapidly, to be as aggressive as possible. So this deck is very aggro-centric, but honestly, it relies on the power of Pikachu for the most part and uses Zapdos as a secondary win condition. Moving on to the next deck here, we do have the star of the meta, which is Starmie. Now, this deck has been near the top, and then it's kind of hovered down a little bit, then come right back up. This is a very powerful deck, and it's also notable that Starmie has a free retreat cost, which is something that a lot of relatively new players may not pick up on right away. This is a very versatile deck that utilizes the Starmie line with 2 Starmie EXs. It also has the Articuno EX. Now, me personally, I don't want to say I'm sleeping on Articuno. Like, I respect the card, but I actually think it's kind of overhyped a little bit. The deck does perform well. It has some good results, but ultimately, I think that like what you're relying on here is it's Misty. Misty has this absolutely insane opportunity to ramp completely out of control. Like, Misty in and of itself can just win a game off its high rolls, right? And of course, it has the low roll potential as well. But what you're really relying on here is massive rolls from Misty, and then getting a tremendous amount of power being generated from your Articuno, and of course the consistency of your Starmie, which does a lot of power. I mean, it's 2 water energy for 90, and then it's also a very retreat capable card at 130 HP body. So a very mobile card, high damage card, and overall a deck that has multiple win conditions overall. Now we have 2 versions of Charizard, the flame of the meta. Now this has a tremendous amount of damage output, and obviously what your core line here is much like the Mewtwo deck that requires the Gardevoir energy kind of manipulation and ramp. You have the Moltres EX, which provides the ramp for this particular deck. Okay, now Charizard requires a lot of energy in order to do the 200 damage, which is basically a one-shot hit kind of knockout for every Pokemon in the game currently. But Charizard EX hits extremely hard, but it needs that Moltres EX ramp in order to kind of get to the position that it needs. This particular version of the deck actually runs the non-EX version of Charizard as well, just utilizing the straight-up Fire Spin. So you have 2 versions here. Obviously, the advantage of running the non-Charizard non-EX version, is that it does not give 2 points away to your opponent as an EX, but obviously does reduce damage. The EX version also has increased HP, so a little more resilient, a little more damage, similar effects. It also does not have the slash here, so that extra ability to attack for 60 at 3 energy is pretty helpful, whereas the non-EX version of Charizard has to go all the way to Fire Spin, of course ignoring the evolutionary chain along the road there. Now the second version, and we're just calling it the pony version, I actually kind of prefer this one a little bit. It has a much more steady ramp, and what you have here is the Ponyta to Rapidash. You utilize the Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard evolutions alongside Moltres EX to generate your ramp, but of course your Ponyta and your Rapidash don't need ramp. They just need 1 energy to do their thing, hold the fort down, do some poke damage while you get your Charizard up and ready. So this is another version of the Charizard deck that we're currently seeing in the meta. Moving on from there, we do have the staller of the meta, and this is Dragonite. Now, Dragonite is probably one of the absolute most popular non-EX cards in the game right now. It has a tremendous amount of power potential, and it does require a little bit of buildup, obviously with Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite itself. However, the way you get there with that 4 energy requirement for its Draco Meteor is to use Weezing in conjunction with Koga. Now, basically, Weezing has a good statted body at 110, only requires 1 energy for tackle, but it also does the poison ability. What's key here is that you can utilize Koga to bounce it back to your hand, which essentially resets the card, and then allows you to get it back out there, and it just prevents your opponent from kind of like getting their game plan going. It's a great stall kind of tactic in order to get your Dragonite online and then basically sweep insane power across your opponent's board state. So a very interesting deck. It revolves around stalling with the Weezing and the Koga. It's kind of like the Pokemon Pocket version of Bounce. A very interesting list nonetheless. Then we go to the flex pick. Now, I like this one a lot. This one here is using the Starmie, Staryu kind of evolutionary line. Starmie, obviously a very good Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket, but this is also using Greninja, which I really like as well, because with Water Shuriken, you can actually attack benched Pokemon from the bench. So this has this nice little poke effect that I really like. This deck here also utilizes Misty. However, what's really interesting about it is you can utilize Sabrina, take something out into the bench, disrupt their game plan, also attack the bench with Water Shuriken while also doing 90 damage with Hydro Splash on the Starmie. So there's a lot of ways to approach the disruption and the attack vectors of this deck. It's very flexible, very versatile with the way that it can win games. It has lower damage output, right? And so that's something worth considering, but overall, a very interesting deck in the current meta for Pokemon Pocket. Thank you so much for watching. That was a quick rundown, and we'll do future ones of these as well on a regular basis to give you an idea of what's out there, what's going on, and what is performing. Got another video for you on the screen, and we'll see you on that next one.